Please welcome to the stage President of Peak Solutions, Mr. Richard Fagerlin.
Now that is a short introduction. That's how you do it, okay? This is amazing. Who had a great time last night with Coach Tressel? Right? Oh my gosh. Cognitive ability. I was just waiting when he said, research shows us that most people don't think for themselves. That's actually what I was expecting for him to say. This idea that we lead with our hearts or we lead with knowledge, one or the other is not okay. We need to be able to bring both of those together. So I just want to do a little bit of an investigation here before we start. How many of you, show me your hands, how many of you are sitting next to someone that you actually also sat next to last night? Raise your hand. Okay, keep your hands up. How many of you, in addition, are sitting next to someone right now that you actually already knew? Raise your hand. Now that's almost everyone. So now here's a little bit of research for you. Research tells us that about 89.9% of people would rather sit next to someone that they know but don't like than next to someone that they don't know. So, look to your left, look to your right, and you figure out where the statistics are for you. It's all right, 82.7% of all statistics are made up anyway, so this is good. It's funny what Coach Tressel is talking about, this cognitive ability. I was so glad when he defined that. I'm like, what's cognitive ability? It's your knowledge, your experience, your learning, your talent. And so I want to figure out actually what the cognitive ability is here with this group of trustees, board members, managers, and anybody else, all right? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to say a word. You're going to say that word, then you're going to spell that word. How's that? Okay? So the word is pots. So when I say pots next, I want you to say that word. Ready? Pots. Spell it. P-O-T-S. Now say it twice. Pots, pots. Spell it twice. P-O-T-S, P-O-T-S. 3 times. Say it 3 times. Pots, pots, pots. Fast. How do you spell it? P-O-T-S, P-O-T-S, P-O-T-S. When you come to a green light, what do? One person said go. The rest of you said stop. This is low cognitive ability in here. When you come to a green light, you go, not stop. Should I give you one more chance? One more chance. All right, the word is silk. Are you ready? Silk. Say it with me. Silk. Spell silk. Say it twice. Spell it twice. S-I-L-K, S-I-L-K. Say it 3 times. Silk, silk, silk. Spell it 3 times. S-I-L-K, S-I-L-K, S-I-L-K. What do cows drink? There we go. We're growing. This is how this works. We progressively get better as time goes on. My name's Richard Fagerlin. I'm from Colorado. I live north of Denver in Fort Collins. I was with y'all before a couple of years ago at a winter conference meeting. You had Archie Griffin speak the night before, then Coach Tressel last night. I suppose you bring a Heisman Trophy winner up next. I'm going to be an official Ohio Buckeye. This is crazy. I love it. I've been leading Peak Solutions since 2001. With the charge to help people love what they do and who they do it with. I'm a lifelong co-op guy. My very first job, actually in college, I took an internship with a large farm supply, farmer-owned co-op. Went to work for them, led all leadership programs, a lot of member development stuff, worked in a consulting group. I was the head of HR for 5 co-ops. Then in 2001, I started this business. My mom retired as the member services manager at our local distribution co-op, and my dad retired from another large co-op. So it's in the blood. I just can't get away from it. And in the midst of all of that, we've got clients that are in any kind of size, shape, and industry all over the world. And I've grown a significant passion for working with trustees, board members, leaders, executives across this industry. So how I came to this stage today, to this topic that we're going to talk about, is in June of 2020. I'm in Colorado. I think my version of COVID in Colorado was a little different than many of your versions. It was pretty, not the actual COVID, but the treatment around it was pretty significant. And things were hard. It was hard to get around and do anything. And I was on the board of directors. I was going on to the executive committee of the largest nonprofit in our region. Large community foundation, about $300 million, a big staff, a bunch of donor advice funds, a really, really great nonprofit. And on one day, our CEO came in, and he resigned and said, I'm taking a job somewhere else. And our board called an emergency meeting. And I thought, here's my time to shine. I've got this HR background. I'm going to help find this next CEO, I'm going to actually provide some value, because I don't know if any of you feel this way, but I spent a long time on the board going, I don't know what to say, I don't know what value to add, I don't know what's going on, I'm just trying to ask some good questions. And instead of helping them through that process, they all basically cornered me and asked if I would be the interim CEO. And I thought, that's a bad idea. Trust me, you don't want that. You don't want me to be your next CEO. And they're like, we don't want you to be our next CEO, but we've had this CEO for 20 years. And wouldn't it be great if we just took a pause for a minute and tried to decide, what is it that we're looking for? Who are we looking for? Why are we looking for someone? And who else to guide us in that but you? And I thought, yeah. And then they also said, plus, you're not going anywhere for a few months. Business has slowed down for you, hasn't it? I'm like, that's true. So I did that. And on one day, I went from being a board member to reporting to a board. And in that moment, it was like my entire life, 25 years of experience flashed before my eyes. Because all my time leading up to that, the majority of my time was spent with senior leadership teams, executives, managers, leaders inside of organizations. And I would hear about y'all, and they would ask me if there's anything we can do to help develop y'all as the board. And I'm like, no, there's that kind of this veil that I don't want to pierce. I want to stay on this side and work with you all, and you can help the boards get better. But in my first day on the job, I started listening to the staff and asking them how things were going, and I started understanding and hearing the effect that the board, which I was on 30 hours prior to this, had on the staff. And it wasn't necessarily negative, but it was something that I would never have known. And so my world started colliding, and I realized that the effort and energy that we've been spending all of these years helping executives and leaders and managers to get better, to grow, to improve, 100% of all of those things can apply to board members. And by the way, I got to let you know this from the very beginning. I'm an equal opportunity offender. It is my goal to step on everyone's toes before the day is over. I have a breakout too, so if we go through this morning thing and I didn't step on your toes, or in the afternoon, come see me in my breakout. And if that didn't happen, then I'll just hold a little court session out here, and I'll try and step on everyone's toes, because what I want to do is I want to challenge you. So here's part of the first challenge. Is one of the things I realized is that over the years, the leadership teams, the executives, the managers that you hire to run your business, 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year is 2,080 hours, and they're spending that plus more. Leading, running, thinking about your business. And if we start to count up the hours that you as trustees and board members are thinking about it, it's a lot less. It should be. So you got this team, 5, 6, 7, 8 people, 10 people that are running the business, leading the business. And so here's what I've seen, is that the sophistication, the knowledge, the ability, what we're looking for in leaders of your organizations, your co-ops, has been going like this over years. And what we've been seeing and asking from board members has not been going at the same trajectory. So what we have is senior leaders of organizations that are going like this, and board members that are maybe not doing the same thing. And as time goes on, if you drag that out, the gap starts to grow. And so we find folks in a boardroom. It's not that you're not paying attention, you don't know what's going on, but you got some leaders around you that are they're literally worldwide experts. They know a ton. And so it creates this gap and this challenge. And so what we want to do today is we want to talk about traditional director development. Traditional director development is this. We're in the midst of traditional director development. Traditional director development is we all get together. We have someone like me who throws a 5-gallon bucket of stuff on you. You got a couple thimbles. You hope to catch a little bit, take some home. But the fact is that you got a long time before your next board meeting, so maybe those thimbles make it to the next board meeting, but probably they don't. And maybe you remember a few things. I had fun last night. There was a handful of you that came up and talked to me and said, when you were here last time, you said this and you said that. And some of you were like, you were here last time? And this is hard, because to remember what you had for dinner on Monday, when you get to the board meeting on Thursday, that's challenging enough. But to remember what we get here. So we have traditional director development, and this is important. So I'm not bastardizing this. I'm not challenging it. You should do this. This is traditional director development. But I think what we do in traditional director development is they're the necessary components that you just had. This is like the general blocking and tackling. Here we are coming on the greatest season in all of life, and it's the beginning of football season. And if you don't agree, that's fine, but you're wrong, because it is. And all these teams are reporting. Whether they're a third grade Pop Warner team or they're an NFL team, these teams are getting together. And the quarterbacks are getting together. When the quarterbacks get together, they don't go and all of a sudden run the most complex play that they're going to use to convert a 2-point conversion at the end of the season. What they do is they stand there in a straight line and they work on fundamental throwing. I don't care if they've been doing it for 30 years or for 2 years. They work on these fundamentals. The linemen don't go out and all of a sudden work on all of their blocking schemes. They work on the first 2 steps. You've got to take these steps. The receivers go out. Some of these receivers, if you're in the NFL, how many times have you run an out pattern? I mean, it's like tens of thousands of times you've done this, but you're going to do it again without pads, just your helmet. Work on this. The fundamentals matter. So this is where we're at today, is so much of what we do in director development is the fundamentals, and they're important. We call it governance. I'm going to put air quotes around governance a lot because we talk about governance, and what we do is when we don't know what to call something that a board's involved with, we just call it all governance. So everything is governance. Well, it's not all governance. There's some things that happen, and so in economics, we know that there are things that are necessary, but they're not sufficient. We know that there's things that are necessary, but they're not sufficient. So this training camp, all these basics are absolutely critical. They're necessary, but they're not sufficient. And so what we want to do is we want to go from getting the job done to being high performance. We want to go from just getting the job done as board members to being high performance. And so this is the statement. This is the big idea, is how do we be the type of board that the best CEO, the best manager wants to work for, is going to fight to work for? I actually think when it's all said and done, bless you, I think that when it's all said and done, this is your objective. Yes, you want to steward the resources of your co-op. You want to serve your members. You want to provide reliable, affordable power. You want to be able to impact your communities. But ultimately, about the only reason that your job exists is to ensure that you've got a really good manager leading your business. It's like your main and most important job. So what if every time you got together, you were thinking, do we have the type of board that any manager is going to want to come, or they're going to fight to do this? Because let's not do a show of hands. Just kind of nod your head like this. How many of you think in the next 5 or 6 years you might be looking for a new CEO? Some of you because of their age, some of you because, managers are on heads on a swivel. Like, what do you think? Listen, here's the statistics. You're not getting any younger. None of us are. Board members aren't. Managers aren't. We're at the midst of, there's this cliff. There's this pending cliff in the industry. And because of the co-op retirement plan, we can look at this and we know how many people are within the age. We know they call it overemployment instead of working past your years. Like when you could retire, when you don't. There's just so much of this. And so I think that across the entire nation, this is a huge thing. We're going to be looking for new managers left and right. And if that's your one main job, we've got to pay attention. So what if you were to be that type of board that any manager is fighting to work for? I've got several clients in all through the co-op space, not just in distribution co-ops, but all through the co-op space that are saying, I'd like to have that job, or I'd like to, in some cases they're talking about merging together. I'd like to do that, but I don't want to work for that board, or that board is something that is challenging to me. And so if you want to attract the best talent, this is where we're at. So we're going to go from traditional director development to getting it done in a major way. And we're going to focus on 3 things, just 3 things. And those are this idea that you got to stop, start, and continue something. Something that you're doing today as a board member. I hope as you go through today's discussions, you hear some things that maybe you're doing, yourself, or your whole board are doing, that you should stop doing. And might I suggest that a conversation at your next board meeting about everyone's stop, start, continue list from this conference could be a high value. What's something that you need to stop doing? We're doing today, we should not do this. What's something that you heard? It's like, wow, we've not done that, or we haven't done it in a while, or we used to do it, but we need to get back to it. Something we need to start doing. But also, maybe you should be encouraged that there's some things that you're doing well, they're pretty great, and you're like, hey, I got some confirmation that what we're doing is great. We should keep doing that. We should continue doing that. So I want you to think about that. And then I want to make a couple assumptions, but I need you to tell me this is the truth. Raise your hand if you actually want to be the best trustee and director possible. Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you don't. Okay? And you want your board to be the best that's possible. Raise your hand. Right? Yeah. And the question really is, how often do you think, how can I be a better board member? Is this something that you're thinking about? You can just start like raising your hand. Is this something that you think about every single day? Anybody? Once a week? On a monthly basis? Right before a board meeting? At this exact moment? At this exact moment? Coach Tressel's list of those 5 things to take yourself to be something special and unique. There's that hard work. Yes, there's this talent. But really, what about all the other things that it takes in order to be a better board member? So here's the problem. Anybody in here, anyway, and be honest, I'm not going to make you prove it. So I'm not going to, drag you through the mud like Missy got drugged yesterday. That was hard work, girl. Good job. How many of you would consider yourself a musician? Anybody? Musician? Okay. One of you. That's fantastic. How about any of you wish that you could be a musician? Like you have a desire, like you want to be in a rock band like this, playing at Leaper's Fork and outside of Franklin, Tennessee, just ripping it up. Huh? Anybody kind of secretly want to do this? Karaoke king. Now, when you have a great rock band, let's say we put a great rock band up here, and you got all these cast of characters on the band. Let's leave this slide up. What's the most important member of a band? Anybody? The drummer. The drummer. And you can barely even see the drummer, so I got to zoom in on the drummer. Here's the old drummer. Man. But by the way, this is like a recent picture. It's not the 70s, but we're bringing it back. The drummer is the most important because he drives the music, he sets the tone, leads the band, sets the cadence. I talk to friends of mine who are in bands, and they say they would rather have an average band and a great drummer than a great band and an average drummer because the drummer drives everything. It's that cadence. And here's where I believe. I'm just going to set the tone here. I think part of the reason why it's hard to grow and develop as a board the same way that an executive team does is simply by the number of times and the amount of time that you meet. My wife and I have been married for 25 years, and if on our anniversary, on Valentine's Day, and on her birthday, which happened to be kind of packed in close together, on those 3 days, and I picked 3 more extra days, we talked about how our relationship's going. How's that going to work for me? Anybody think I get feedback more often than that? Like I got an immediate feedback mechanism there. That relationship is important. We talk often about how that's going. We talk often about what we want to accomplish. We talk a lot about where we're giving and where we're getting and what we need and what we're, all of that, because we want that relationship to improve. So in this process, the cadence is critical. Traditional director development, you come in, you have, even if it's just at your meetings or meetings like this, that's just not enough for you to actually get better. You've got to incorporate this, and I'm going to suggest that you incorporate it into your actual meetings, that every single meeting should have some sort of component where you're evaluating how do we get better, where did we get better, where do we need to get better, and you're constantly thinking about this, right? We'll talk a little bit about this later, but I was having a fun conversation with some folks yesterday. Back in the olden days, before you got your board packets electronically, right? There was a great mechanism to figure out whether or not you read your board packet. What was it? And so someone would show up to the board meeting, they'd have their packet, and they'd open it right in front of everybody, and everybody, oh, at least I opened mine in the truck before I came in, And so I'm lobbying all of the online board portals to put a shaming mechanism on your iPad, so that when you show up and you open it and it's like, oh yeah, I've read this, that some alarm goes off, like a light, because we need to really pay attention. We need to have a cadence of how we're trying to grow and improve. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lead you through what we call in our organization, we call it the board health model. We want boards to be healthy. And if boards are going to be healthy, there's 3 main components that they're going to go through. Number 1, a board needs to understand its purpose. Board needs to understand the process, and a board needs to be able to perform well. And when you can do all 3 of these things, and you can do all 3 well, then you're probably going to be a healthy board. So let's just talk about purpose. Purpose, the question around purpose is, why are we even here? I think it's a great question to ask. And I think it's unfair to assume that we all know the reason why we're here, and I think it's unfair to assume that every time we meet that the reason we're here is the same answer. So here's a few things that help us understand why we're here. The first question here, we'll get to more of this later too. What's required of me? It's a great question. It's my favorite question. What's required of me? When we think about what's required of me and you ask that question to yourself and then answer it, it's likely you're going to bring what's required of you, and it's going to be different than what you were going to do anyways. So if you thought about what's required of me right now and you answered it, it's going to be something different than what you want to do. What's the role of the board? Literally, what's the role? What's our responsibility and what's our role? And more particular, what's our role right now? Like you can set what's the role of a board member on day one. These new board members, you all stood up and you're like, what's my role? And you could probably fill out an answer and give it. But what about next month, the next quarter, next year? What's your role? This one's really important. It's altitude. I believe that people come with a baked-in altitude. And the altitude is, do you like thinking at 30,000 feet? Do you like thinking at 10 or 15,000 feet? Or do you like buzzing the ground or eating the grass and just getting in the weeds? Right? So just be honest. Let's have a show of hands here. How many of you are most comfortable when we're getting in the weeds, we're going through the details, and we're really figuring things out? Raise your hand if you're kind of a low-altitude natural person, right? This is not raising your hand. Put your hands up. How many of you are more comfortable? It's like, I don't need to know how the watch is made. Just tell me what time it is, and let's figure out what the time mechanism is. How many of you feel comfortable there? How many of you are just uncomfortable right now having to raise your hand? Okay? Fantastic. I don't care what the answer is. Here's the thing, is that we find ourselves with agenda items on our board meetings that are 30,000-foot agenda items, right? And if you're a 500-foot altitude preference person, what happens is you start asking questions that aren't appropriate to the conversation. And it doesn't mean that we don't need context. Sometimes we need to go up, down, in order to stay up. And sometimes we need to go way up, way up, way up to be able to bring something to the ground. That's not the question. The question is, when we've decided that this is this level altitude conversation, and you keep bringing it down, not necessarily because it's required, but because it's comfortable for you, what you create is meeting turbulence. And there's no oxygen mass that's going to drop for everybody else around you. And so that's something to pay attention to. And you know, what if on your agenda items you just went through and you marked off what the altitude of this conversation is? Or if you find someone who keeps bringing us up to the big picture, but we're trying to solve something and make it happen and make a decision, you say, wait a minute, I don't know if we should be at 30,000 feet right now. Haven't we covered that? Let's get down on the ground and solve the problem, or vice versa. Does it make sense? Altitude. We don't want to get altitude sickness. And then sake. Any sake lovers in here? I know you're other things lovers. I was watching the bar. I was busy last night. Now, sake is a little different. This sake is about skills, ability, knowledge, and experience. Every single board member brings these. And some of you bring skills and abilities, knowledge and experience from somewhere else that maybe doesn't apply here. They're great knowledge, skills, and abilities. They're great experiences, but they just don't necessarily apply here. And what I find oftentimes, I do this myself, is that we reach for something familiar. We reach for something that worked. You know, I grew up on a farm. We raised beef cattle. My dad was a PhD animal science guy, and so we were doing all kinds. We had graduate students around all the time. We put up hay and worked hard, and so I just kind of have this get it done, put my head down, go buck the hay, and just work hard. That's something that's familiar to me. When I've got to let someone else figure it out and let them fail and let them challenge and let them go do it, and not for me not to do it, that's hard. It's just easier for me to go in and make it happen. Make it happen. And my wife and I are raising 4 boys. They're 24, 22, 18, and 14. And just this weekend, my 18-year-old has this blow up. He's like, you're always going in, changing things, and you just have to put your stamp on it. And I'm like, you're right. And if you weren't 6'3" and could literally body slam me, I would spank you right now. But it's right, it's a gift. It's a gift to find out, like, listen, what he's saying is, get out of my business. I got to figure this out on my own. I want to figure this out on my own. And what I'm saying inside is, but I know the right answer. But that's not going to help him ever figure out the right answer. You all with me? Got to figure out what's right here. All right, that's the purpose. I want you to be thinking about what that looks like for you. Now, process is a little bit different. Process is how do we work? What's the work of what we do? This is where governance comes into play. You know, when you're talking governance, this is kind of the policies, the procedure, it's the legalisms. It literally is your governance structure. Anything else you call governance that's not one of those things isn't governance. It's something else that goes into your process. So maybe it's composition, the board composition. What's the composition look like? You know, we have an interesting thing. We work with a lot of publicly traded and privately held companies, many of them private equity. The boards that are on those companies are brought in for a very specific purpose. You're brought in because it's your money. You're brought in because it's your relationship. You're brought in because one of our clients is an aerospace company. They got 2 people from NASA astronauts, been in orbits around the world. They're in there for their expertise. In our industry, the minimum requirement is to be a member, and we don't look and say, hey, we're missing this gap in this place. We really need someone with a legal mind. It's like, no, we get what we get, and you don't throw a fit, and it's not a bad thing because there's something that's beautiful. When your board's made up of your customer from your community that understands it, it's beautiful, and I think if every company board had that makeup, it would be amazing. But what you don't get is the rest of the boards around the world are there because of some expertise, of some specific value that they bring, and they've been sought out, brought on, asked to be a part of this. And so there's some good from both of them. And when you don't try and figure out what's this composition look like, and we work towards how could we take the process that we have, our governance of electing board members, and maybe we need to have some different thought. Maybe we need to have some different gender. Maybe we have different age demographic. And how are we going to build the composition so it best affects us? The next one is the structure. Maybe you work in an executive committee structure. Maybe you have some subcommittees. Maybe you have officers. So whatever that structure is, that process, the purpose of that is to make things effective. But sometimes, instead of making things effective, we make them efficient. And efficiency and effectiveness don't necessarily go hand in hand. Sometimes, in an effort to be efficient, we lose effectiveness. And so there's, that board that I was a part of, that was one of the things that we realized. It was a 17-member board with an executive committee. When it was all said, at the end of the day, the executive committee was the board. And the rest of us just came around and went, fa-rum, rubber stamp, whatever it was that they did, because they did all the heavy lifting. We didn't have the perspective. It was hard to make decisions. And so that was good understanding. I didn't realize that when I was in the board, but when I was reporting to that board, I started to see that. What's the role that the board plays in strategy? I don't know if you feel this way. Some of you, this is going to be a great relief. Some of you, it's going to be a great frustration. Let it land wherever it lands. I'm not positive what the role of the board should be in strategy. I think that's something that you should figure out. Let's go back to the hours that you have paid this group of people to lead and run your business. They probably know a pretty significant deal. And a lot of board members that I talk to, they're like, well, I want to come with a great idea, and I want to come with a solution, and I want to come with what we should do. I'm like, maybe you should come with the right questions, and maybe you should interrogate. Maybe you should ask the management, what else have you considered, and where do you think things are going, and what's your opinion? And really utilize that mix between board and management in a great way so that you can develop great strategy. So I think boards and managements together need to define what's the slide rule on whose role of strategy, what's that role look like, what are we looking for from each other? And then this idea of development. If you want to be a great board, if you really want to be a great board, and you want to be that board that any manager ever in the history of time is like, I want to work there, that's where I want to work. Whether they're an internal candidate, an external candidate, if that's where they want to work, then this board has just constantly got to be interrogating itself, trying to get better, growing. And then the last question around performance is, are we making a positive impact? Are we? Is there alignment with leadership? Alignment doesn't mean total agreement. My picture of alignment, I want to give you a picture of this. My picture of alignment is like a 4-ton concrete brick at the bottom of the lake or an ocean that has a chain attached to it and a buoy sitting up on the water. And so the alignment is, there can be some things, environmental things, the tide, traffic, weather can change where that buoy is going, but that buoy is not going very far because it's attached to something solid. And so alignment's important. It doesn't necessarily mean to be 100% agreement, but you got to have something that you're grounded to. I think it's important. I really do. I think it's important that as a general manager or CEO that you're getting evaluated by your board. One of the common things that I hear, and you're not going to hear it because they just don't feel comfortable telling you this, is they want to get more feedback. And it's just like with my wife. If on Valentine's Day I sit down, I'm like, all right, I'd like to give you your appraisal. On a 3-point scale, I was at 1.7 to be honest. So let's go through the 5 love languages. On words of affirmation, it's a 3. On physical touch, we're going to have to put you on a performance improvement plan here. Is that going to go well for me? Huh? Yes or no? No. No, it's not going to go well for me. And so same thing with your manager. They want to know how they're doing. They want to hear this. They don't want to wait for some evaluation at the end of the year and you say, well, right, you've been doing good. We're going to reward you with a 1.7% raise and everything's going to be good. They want to hear some of this feedback along the way. Whether they need it, whether they say they need it or not, they want it. And same thing with the board. I feel like this idea that we got to assess ourselves and look at ourselves, interrogate ourselves, remain curious. I was on my list. I just love that Coach Tressel had that on there, that curiosity. We start thinking that we're right. We got to stop reading our own fan mail. So we got to get other people's opinions, and then we got to track our progress towards our goals. So when we look at the level here, the idea is where are we strong, where are we weak, where are areas that we can improve, and what if on a regular basis you were looking at these 3 areas as a board and just figuring out how can I make our board better here? How can I? So when I said there's 3 things to work on, I said for you as an individual and your board as a whole. Because if we make it the board's responsibility, it doesn't work. When it's everyone's responsibility, whose responsibility is it? It's nobody's responsibility. So it's like I gotta know what's my responsibility. And so if you take nothing else, here's what I want you to take. It is my responsibility to build a healthy board. And yours alone. And if you do that, then maybe someone else will, and maybe someone else will, and maybe someone else will. But when you say it's going to be everyone's, we may never get there. Because every organization is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. And the word that you spend the most time of all of these words, the word that you spend the most time in your board meetings is which word? Which one on here? This is the interactive part. It's results. You spend most of your time talking about results, looking at results. You should. It's important. It's critical. It's your fiduciary responsibility. But ultimately, if every organization is perfectly designed to get the results it gets, what one word should you spend time on? You're right, design. We got to look at the design. How did we get here? Every relationship is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. Every investment plan is designed to get the results it gets. Every workout, diet, exercise, whatever, is perfectly designed to get the results it gets. We've got a list here. I'm going to go through this. And if you're going to be the type of board that any manager would just fight to work for, then you got to avoid some major things. And so I've come up with this list, the 7 deadly sins. Now, in the actual 7 deadly sins, each one of these sins has an anecdote quality that counteracts it, right? Has something that goes towards overcoming it. And you got to figure out what yours is. Now, I've worked on this list for a long time, and it probably should be the 100 deadly sins, but I got to narrow it down. This is not easy. So I'm going to go through this list of 7. I want you to pay attention. And I want you to pay attention for 2 reasons. One, which one do you feel like you are most likely to commit? And the other is, which one does your board most likely to commit? Because it's likely you're committing at least one of these sins, and your board is probably committing one of these sins. It's not all of them. It's not all of them. By and large, I have yet, maybe once, but other than this one time, I've yet to work with a co-op board that's like, this is totally dysfunctional and it needs mediation and legal attention. The rest of everyone else is like, this could be better. This could be better. And most everyone's here for the right reason, and they have the right heart and the right perspective and the right expectations. So let's go through this list. Here's the full list. I'll break each one of them down. Deadly sin number 1, you don't know your job. There's this thing called Goldilocks syndrome. I'm going to spin an entire breakout on number 2. Unequal ink in the board meetings. We'll talk about how each person shares. Hidden agendas. Living beyond your usefulness. spilling the beans, and then this idea of sandbox thinking. So let's just start off with don't know their jobs. There's things that we need to do during the board meeting. You've got to participate. You've got to bring yourself to the board meeting at the right time. And you got to show up strong. You got to do something great. One of the things I can do right now is you can look around. There's several of you that are napping. I understand it's been a hard day already. So like the person next to you, because during the meetings we need to pay attention and we need to show up and we need to bring ourselves to the strength that we have, the value we have. But in order to do this, we've got to prepare. We've got to know what's our role before the meeting. And then really there's this idea of between the meetings. Nod your head if you realize that your role as a board member in your communities has gone from just showing up and doing board work to you've got to represent your co-op between meetings. You got to have some conversation with people that you didn't used to have. People that went before you weren't having to do this, but today we're having to represent more. And I think this is growing and growing and growing. And some people are like, I did not sign up for this. It's like, I know, it just happens. And it's critical. So what do we need to do? We need to show up. We need to know our job. This John Carver is one of the grandfathers of board governance, and he has the policy for governance model that's really cool. But he says you can get a clear answer to the question, what's your job, if you ask anyone in the organization except for the board. If you ask any employee, they know what their job is. You ask a lineman, they know what their job is. You ask an engineer, they know what their job is. You ask some vegetation management person what their job is. They know what their job is. You ask your manager, they know what their job is. You ask a board member, like, well, and you get like 7 board members, you get 9 answers to what this role and responsibility is. So we got to understand what this is. It's a sin if we don't know that. Number 2 is the Goldilocks syndrome. The Goldilocks syndrome is sometimes we're too involved, sometimes we're not involved enough. Sometimes we get way into management, sometimes we don't get enough into management. And so very rarely we just getting just right. What's that just right? And here's a comforting and a challenging thing is that I believe sometimes in order to know if we've crossed a line, we have to cross the line. Like, did we go too far? So whether you cross the line or not, that's not the issue. That's not the challenge. What I do once I've crossed the line, that's now the issue or the challenge. Did I go too far? Did I say too much? And we're not at all trying to increase insecurity into the equation here. What we're trying to do is introduce curiosity, understanding, self-awareness, altitude. We already talked about that. That's important. What I want to know versus what I need to know. How many of you, and not you, just one of your fellow board members, and don't look, just look at me, don't look at each other. How many of you have had a fellow board member that's asking too many dang questions because it's something that's important to them, but it's really not important to the conversation? Raise your hand. Don't point. I said just raise your hand. All right? Okay. Let's go back to our list. What's your highest and best contribution? What is your highest and best contribution? Like, ask that question. Think about this. Why am I here? What is, for me, as a trustee for my co-op, what is my highest and best contribution? And then let's ask that question. What's required from me? And I've put in parentheses right now. If I think about what's required from me right now, then I'm going to show up. I'm going to probably get closer to the just right porridge and the just right bed than going on either side. Okay, when we think about what's required of me right now, there's some juxtapositions here I want to share. Some of this is actually personality. Sometimes sometimes humility is what's required from you. That humble response. Stressel's dad, you have 1,000 options to keep your mouth shut. I'm afraid I still have 950 of mine left. I need to exercise a few more of those. So sometimes humility is what's required. And to have a humble posture. And to let others go first and to not challenge the process. Sometimes that's what's required. And sometimes the courageous thing is required. Sometimes we're waiting for the board chairs to say something. By the way, raise your hand if you're a board chair in here. Bless your hearts. Seriously, the board chair's got a tough responsibility, tough role. And a lot of times what we do when there's a challenge in the board meeting, we look to the board chair to do something, right? Why don't you say something? Because that's the board chair's role. Sometimes courage now is needed. If the board chair's not seeing it, not doing it, not explaining something, sometimes it's time for you to step up and say, hey, wait, time out. I'm not for sure that, and not take the board chair's job, but sometimes we have to exercise a little bit of courage. And board chairs that you're in here, if you're doing this and there's something that's going off the rails and someone in a really appropriate and effective way comes to your support, nod your head if that's a value to you. right? That feels good. It's good to have that. So that's important. So sometimes you need humility. Sometimes you need courage. Sometimes you need order. Sometimes we need to bring order, get things right, create systems and process. And sometimes we need to have disruption and ask the disrupting questions. And what I think is in this room, if we divided you up, some of you would go over on this line and say, I'm an order person, and some would say, I'm a disruption person, right? The disruption people, they're the ones who just say it how it is. You know who those are. And the order people are like, well, we need to have proper process and approval and all of this. And the challenge is when disruption is needed and you're an order person, it's hard to do that, and vice versa. So think about this. What's required of you, order or disruption? Policy or philosophy? Are we going to follow the rules and understand what's important here and go by the governance, or do we need to philosophically define what is it that we're even doing here? Why are we doing this? What does this look like? Advice versus accountability. I have a personal belief that these are the two roles of a board member, and everything else falls into this. I feel like every board member's responsibility is to provide advice or accountability, and anytime you're doing something other than those two, you should have a really good reason. Because so much of what we've talked about, if you double-click them, falls under these two. So where am I? Am I providing advice or accountability? Is this time to speak up or shut up? Are we thinking about now? Or are we thinking about the future, right? So let's move on to the third sin. It's this unequal ink. The idea on unequal ink is that, so this is a meeting. And in a meeting, let's say this row right here. Y'all are the board. And we have this board meeting, and someone's not taking notes. Someone's transcribing every word spoken. And so we're transcribing every word spoken. And the idea is Google has done a study within all of the teams that they have, and they're trying to figure out what are the most productive teams. And there's a lot of things that they found, but one of the key things they found was the most productive teams have what they call equal ink, where everyone speaks in about the same amount, right? And when people speak in a meeting in about the same amount, you're getting the best from everybody. Okay? This is another interactive part. I want all participation. How many of you have someone on your board that's all too willing to take someone else's ink? Group of liars this morning. How many of you have people on your board that are all too willing to let someone else take their ink? Right? And so we want to hear from everyone. And there's some people like, I don't need to say anything because it was all said. I don't want to just me too something. That's fine. That's fantastic. But have you ever sat back and just looked at a group of people and you could tell someone's got something to say? Be the person that you say, hey, wait, I see you've got a thought. Why don't you share? And let's get this out. We want to get some equal ink. Number 4, hidden or not so hidden agendas. Anybody seen this? Right? Someone's got an axe to grind. You know, I don't know in Ohio if this works. You know, I'm from Colorado where we literally have got from the spectrum interests and needs and desires and member profiles. And so we see a lot of people that come to get on the board with an absolute agenda. Then they get on and they very soon become smarter. They're like, I'm going to come in, I'm going to fix this, and we're going to da-da-da. And then they get on and they're like, oh, well, there's a lot more to this, and there's a lot of challenge. And so here's the challenge with the hidden agendas. You've not been participating, or you maybe haven't had these. Maybe you don't have people that share too much. But have any of you, be honest, have any of you ever felt like you've been in a board where someone had a hidden agenda? Wasn't it lovely? Now, do you feel like the person who had the hidden agenda actually had nefarious and bad thoughts that they desired to produce harm? Or did they think what they were doing was right? Most of the time, they think what they're doing is right. And in some cases, what they're doing actually is right. So it's not that they're necessarily having this hidden agenda in a way that my goal is to fracture, fissure, and disrupt this board. It's because they think what they're saying, doing is right. They feel like this is an important thing. And so in this hidden agenda, I think it's easy to just let this go and to not say something. And this goes back to the cadence. If in a November board meeting something shows up and there's a challenge and someone's got a bone to pick and it's just like super uncomfortable, and you're like, if we just get to the end of this meeting And then you do. And then you wait till December, and then they show up with it again. And this happens 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the road. Because of the cadence at which you're communicating, it's hard to turn that around, isn't it? In a management team meeting, if that happens on a Monday, we're probably going to talk about it on Monday, maybe on Tuesday. By the time we get to Thursday, we're going to work around this and figure what's going on. And in a cadence of a week, that's basically half a year of board meetings. And so the encouragement to you here is when you find any of these little challenges, an inch crack in 1 month turns into a foot, turns into a yard. Next thing you know, it's a mile, and it's hard to close this if we don't have a commitment as a board that we're going to address things together. Living beyond your usefulness. I know none of you have seen this, but there is something here, and this is a hard thing to say, but there are times when a board member gets to this place where it's not that they've become too whatever. It's just that their usefulness isn't the same as it was before, or they've lived past it. And there's not much in the bylaws or the governance that says, okay, here's your usefulness score. It's time for you to move on. And so I was at a conference one time. I was co-presenting with a PhD economist, and she says in front of like 500 people, hey, Richard, do you think that we should have a board removal process, director removal process? And my inside voice was, well, I wish you would have given me a heads up on that question before I was in front of 500 people. And so I'll give you the quick answer. Yes, you should have one. It's absolutely critical, and the best time to have one is before you need it, okay? Period. End of sentence. Work on that. But I want to live in a world where you don't need one. I want to live in a world where when you find yourself getting to the place where I'm questioning, is it time for me to move on? Do I need to make space for the next generation? Do I need to add to the community in some way? That you're willing and able to do that. The board itself comes together and says, hey, Richard, I think it's time when the next election rolls around for you to make room for someone else. And I think we should start having those conversations. And it's a hard thing to have, but I do feel like this is something that nobody wants to talk about, so I'll scuff your shoes a little bit on it. Number 6, confidentiality is an important thing. We got to make sure we don't, we keep our secrets and to go out and spill the beans. And when we spill the beans, we're harming a lot of people. We're harming ourselves, we're harming our reputation, we're harming the co-op. And the problem is sometimes we don't know what should be confidential or not. So a simple little thing at the end of every board meeting, hey, what's something that in here everybody needs to know? What's something in here that we talked about that nobody should know? And let's just have a little bit of that conversation to understand what's going on, because I think some people hold so much confidential that they should share because you're representative now between meetings. So pay attention to what that looks like. Last one, encourage sandbox thinking. When a board encourages sandbox thinking, here's what happens in a sandbox. Little kids are in a sandbox. Any of you have grandkids, kids that kind of steal toys from one another, hit each other with their toys, do this kind of thing? They're not terrible people. Here's the problem. They just have the lowest level thinking possible, and they think everyone thinks like me. So I want this sucker. I want this toy. You want me to have this sucker. You want me to have this toy. That's natural. As we grow up, that's not natural. It's not good. And so there's these levels of thinking that we must go through, and the lowest level is everybody thinks like me. The next level is, hey, people think differently. That's nice. Okay, I notice that people think differently. The hardest one of them is the third level, where you get to this place where you think, nobody in this entire world thinks like me. And you start gaining insecurity and frustration, and you feel like you're all by yourself. But the highest level of thinking is that people think differently, and not only is that okay, it's required. We want to do this. And so what we don't want to do is get into the sandbox and start thinking with our own selfish mindset, things that are important to us only. We want to try and get up here and it's like, I want to pull different ideas, thoughts. I want to remain curious. I want to challenge one another. I want to, if it ain't broke, break it. There's times we want to do that. So here's your 7 deadly sins. We work through these 7 deadly sins. I want you to pay attention. Is there a sin that's greater for you than another? Is there a sin that's greater for your board than another? And ultimately, there's this question here is, what do you stand to gain if your board becomes higher performing? What do you stand to gain? And maybe what do you stand to lose? And there's a lot of things that we can do. And one of them, I'm going to close with just 2 more thoughts, is we need to evaluate how well our meetings are. if your meetings are the cadence for you getting better, what if you use your meetings for getting better? And yes, keep doing this and keep going to, NRECA trainings and keep going to other conferences and keep bringing people in and do all this stuff. But what if you have a cadence of when your board's meeting? So what if you worked to this and thought about, hey, today, did I contribute too much, too little, just amount? What was my Goldilocks contributions today? And then what if you had some evaluations instead of once a year? What if at every board meeting you ask questions like, what was the best part of our meeting? What could have been better? What conversation did we need to have but we didn't? How did we add value to the enterprise, to the co-op, to the community today? What undue stress or work are we putting our staff through? Because ultimately, this is our objective. We want to do this. We want to be the type of board that the best CEOs will fight to work for. And we do this by making them better, asking powerful questions, not adding undue burden, preparing, performing, and representing, and giving that feedback. This is the last statement, and then we'll close. You can tell whether a man is clever by his answers, or you can tell whether they're wise by their questions. I don't believe your highest contribution is your answers in the boardroom. I believe your highest contributions are the deep, meaningful questions that you ask. So as you ponder this, I want you to think of those three things. There's something you should stop doing, something you should start doing, and something that you're like, hey, we're doing this, we're doing it well, we should keep doing this. I'm going to be here throughout the rest of the day. I do have a breakout after lunch. I'm happy to hang out, answer any questions. If there's any value that I can provide, I appreciate it. I want to just say thank you for your participation and have a great rest of the day.
Hey, Richard, before you leave the stage, I want you to share one story.
Uh-oh.
And I know this you would never do this on your own, but I'm gonna put you to task. I want you to tell everybody why you're in Ohio.
I'm in Ohio because Doug Miller has become one of my single best friends. Actually, I'm in Ohio because my son married an Ohioan yesterday, or 2 days ago, on Sunday. So I now, we have these 4 boys. My 22-year-old got married on Sunday, and Doug and I were talking in January at a CEO conference, and I was telling him about this, and he's like, oh my gosh, that's our summer meeting. And I'm like, oh my gosh, let's hook up, let's do this. And I, in terms of every organization is perfectly designed to get the results it gets, I'm clearly living on a high. With 4 boys, I finally got my first daughter. But when my son got engaged, a lot of my friends asked me, what do you think about Abby's name? What do you think about Abby? And I said, I love her. The first person that asked me, I just said, I love her. And they're like, ew. I'm like, well, I don't love her because he loves her. I love her because we just deeply care for her and who she is and all of that. And so it's been a great experience. And the tie-in to that is in this industry, there's a lot of passion. There's a lot of passion around co-ops. There's a lot of passion around the purpose and the mission. And it's easy to say, I love this. And you don't love it because generations went before you. You love it because you love it. So I don't know if this is as close to a wedding celebration as that, but thanks for bringing that up, Doug. Appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.